The Malbone Street wreck was the deadliest wreck in all of New York City's subway history. It occurred on November 1st, 1918, on BMT Brighton Line, now known as BMT Franklin Avenue Line, in the Brooklyn neighborhood Flatbush. The crash happened during rush hour traffic on a Friday. 92 passengers died out of 650 total that were on board. The problem started when the train entered a tunnel that had a reverse curve with a speed limit of 6 miles per hour. The driver took this turn at somewhere between 30 and 40 miles per hour. The first car derailed while the next two cars of the train completely flew off the tracks. The side and the tops of the cars were completely torn off in the crash. Here is a quote from the Brooklyn Daily Times newspaper describing the crash while it was still fresh in the minds of all involved. The first car left the tracks just at this point. It was thrown at right angles across the roadbed in front of the entrance to the tunnel. The other cars cut right through it, the second car smashing it to bits and the whole train passing over the wreckage and coming to a stop 200 feet down the tracks inside the tunnel. The Brooklyn Daily Times then went on to say, packed together as in a box without structural strength to give them any protection. The passengers in the second car were crushed and cut to pieces. Not one is believed to have escaped. Surviving passengers were left stuck in the crumpled train cars for at least 45 minutes in complete darkness before rescue arrived. Some survivors were stuck for hours. Firefighters had to build bonfires in the tunnel to provide some light before they could attempt rescue. To make matters worse, the nearby hospital was already over capacity because of the Spanish flu epidemic, so a temporary hospital was set up in Ebbets Field for the victims. While the train crash was obviously caused by the driver taking the turn at 5 times the speed limit, he was hardly the only one to blame for this incident though. The driver, Antonio Edward Luciano, was a 25-year-old man who was just recovering from the Spanish flu. He had just lost his infant daughter days earlier. Even an experienced driver would have an understandably difficult time focusing after all of that. But Antonio was not an experienced driver at all. He was hired as a crew dispatcher. He had never driven an elevated train before, and he had never driven Brighton Beach Line before. In fact, he had never driven a passenger train before at all. He got 3 hours of classroom instruction only, as opposed to the normal 90 hours with hands-on training. So the question remains, why was Antonio Luciano driving the train that resulted in this devastating crash in the first place? The Brooklyn Rapid Transit Company was desperate for drivers and apparently accepted anyone with a pulse willing to drive their trains. The motormen that usually drove these trains were unionized with the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers. On November 1st, the morning of the train crash, the motormen had gone on strike because 29 of their fellow employees had been recently fired, so they were refusing to drive. The BRT, the Brooklyn Rapid Transit Company, elected to keep running their trains with their remaining personnel. Apparently not very well trained personnel at that. The strike was disbanded a few hours after the crash. Another factor worth considering is the fact that the track that this incident occurred on was brand new. It had only been open a couple weeks. Previous tracks in this area were relatively straight, as opposed to this new track, which had sharp curves. Perhaps even an experienced driver would have had difficulties with this track layout. To make matters even worse yet, this train had trailer cars hitched together. It was standard procedure to have motor cars in between trailer cars because they were heavier and they helped provide stability to the more top-heavy trailer cars. As expected, the 2 trailer cars were the ones that derailed and sustained most of the damage. It seems like this company did everything wrong. The mayor, John F. Hyland, and his administration brought the driver Luciano and the Brooklyn Rapid Transit Company to trial for manslaughter. The charges were dropped when the company paid $75 million worth of settlements to the families of the victims. The BRT was out of money and became the Brooklyn Manhattan Transit Corporation, or BMT. They finished paying off the rest of the claims in 1923. The most expensive settlement paid out was $40,000, which is equivalent to $735,000 in 2024. As for Luciano, he changed his name to Antonio Lewis and moved to Queens to work as a construction worker. I don't really blame him for wanting a career change. He eventually retired in Arizona and passed away in 1985. In addition to the settlements paid out, safety measures were drastically improved following the Malbone Street wreck. Speedometers, controls to stop runaway trains, and trackside train stops, to name a few. Because of the tragedy, Malbone Street was reserved for one block of the road, while the rest of the street was renamed Empire Boulevard. On the 101st anniversary, a plaque was installed at the exit of the tunnel. The plaque reads, "In memory of those who lost their lives near this location on November 1st, 1918, when a wooden-bodied train carrying an estimated 650 passengers derailed and crashed under Malbone Street. Nearly 100 people were killed, and nearby Ebbets Field was turned into a makeshift hospital to care for the hundreds injured. This horrific accident led to meaningful reforms and advancement in transit safety, training, and infrastructure. As a result of this tragedy, Malbone Street was eventually renamed and is today known as Empire Boulevard."